Our guest on Gay Waves today is Lis Regula, who has been on Gay Waves twice before. This is third time. And Lis is part of a really big project to change the Constitution of the state of Ohio to include what is basically a human rights amendment that would, well, I'll let Lis give the details, but needless to say, it's a constitutional amendment. It's a big project. And a couple of years ago at one of the prides, I think, Lis, you said you were going to do something, and this turned out to be it. We haven't had you on to talk about it yet, but there's been some big news. So, Lis, welcome to Gay Waves.
Thanks, Eric. Always good to be here.
Well, I appreciate that.
And yes, we've had a lot of big news in the past week over at Ohio Equal Rights.
Yes, you have. So why don't we start out? I'm not sure where our listeners are in this, and whether they know all the details or whatever. So why don't you start out? Just give a summation of what you're up to, and let us know your role in it, because I think that's important.
Sure. So we try to keep a fairly flat structure at Ohio Equal Rights just because we are a grassroots organization and we do believe in equality, which is what brought all of us together. A little bit over a year ago, Michaela Laubacher and Liz Schmidt and some other folks up in Northeast Ohio started talking about what can we do about specifically the attacks on the trans community in Ohio, and how can we kind of stem that legislation and do a better job at protecting our rights here in Ohio. Since then, we've talked with the folks in Nevada, where they passed one of the most recent and most comprehensive equal rights amendments. We've talked with organizations and individuals across the state of Ohio, gotten feedback on language, crafted the language, gotten the initial 1,000 required. We submitted around 2,000 signatures, got certified by the Attorney General, and today got told by the ballot board that they believe that overturning the ban on same-sex marriage that is still a part of Ohio's Constitution is a separate thing from equal rights for all Ohioans.
Yeah, and that's actually the development that prompted me to contact you. We are recording this, by the way, on July the 9th, and the ballot board rejected your proposal today. That's just mark that time for the listeners. But this is a process that all amendments to the Ohio Constitution have to go through. And back in 2004, when I was at the Gay People's Chronicle covering the marriage ban amendment that you're now trying to overturn, I got fairly familiar with this process because it's always challenged and it's always tough. And and you got through the first phase, which was the submission to the Secretary of State on June the 30th. You got through that okay, and the Ohio Attorney General, really surprisingly, because that's usually the first problem, but they certified the title and the summary language, and then it gets sent to the ballot board. And in the case of the ballot board in Ohio, there are constitutional requirements for constitutional amendments to the Constitution. And one of them is the single subject rule, which is part of the amendment process. It's also part of the legislative process. The legislature lately doesn't seem to pay much attention to it. To wit, the combination of the transgender gender affirming care ban for minors with the sports ban. For example, is no doubt a violation of the single subject rule, but nonetheless, that is what is in play here. So you got an adverse ruling. It was a partisan ruling, from what I understand. It was a 3-2. The ballot board is made up of 5 members. There are 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. The Republicans are Secretary of State Frank LaRose, State Senator Teresa Gavarone, and Tony Schroeder, who is the chair of the Putnam County Republican Party, big Ohio right to life guy, just big culture warrior. The Democrats are Senator William DeMora and Representative Terrence Upchurch. And if you don't mind, and I'm going to stop talking here in a second, but and let you have this, but Senator DeMora issued a statement. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but he issued a really strong statement after this vote, and it's not very long. I'd like to just read it. He said, today's decision to split the Equal Rights Amendment is a disgraceful act of partisan manipulation rooted in pure bigotry, said DeMora. The majority chose political gamesmanship over protecting Ohioans' fundamental rights, artificially fracturing a unified civil rights amendment to confuse voters just like they did last year with Issue 1. This shameful overreach exposes their true agenda, using every dirty trick in the book to deny LGBTQ plus Ohioans and other marginalized communities the protections they deserve. In a 3-2 decision, the Democratic members of the board voted against a motion by Secretary of State Frank LaRose to divide the amendment into 2 separate amendments. One to repeal Ohio's current constitutional definition of marriage as exclusively between a man and a woman, and to prohibit the state and local governments from discriminating against a number of protected groups, including LGBTQ plus people. By voting to split the amendment into 2 issues, proponents will have to gather double the amount of required signatures to put the issues on the ballot. And that's Senator DeMora's statement. I didn't know if you had seen that or not, but he sums it up pretty well.
Yes, I had not gotten a chance to read that yet. It's been a bit of a busy day, so I appreciate you reading that. And Representative Upchurch also had some very strong words talking about our campaign, our fight, and the importance of providing protections to all Ohioans from government overreach.
So, Lis, tell us again, for those who are a little less familiar, what exactly does this amendment purport to do?
So, overturning the same-sex marriage ban is one part of it, because the amendment, the initiative as a whole, is all about providing equal rights for Ohioans and protecting Ohioans from discriminatory actions.
Does it spell that out in the amendment?
Yes, and I mentioned Nevada before. We spoke to them and worked with them for strategic reasons. They had a amendment language that was incredibly comprehensive. And knowing Ohio and the diversity that exists within Ohio, we wanted to make sure that we were similarly being comprehensive and looking at all the ways in which people could potentially be discriminated against, and make sure that everyone could see themselves represented in this language in some way, shape, or form. So besides the usual things that people associate with Equal Rights Amendment, gender, sex, religion, race, national origin, etc., we also include disease status, disability status, military status, recovery and addiction status, family formation status, and others.
So it's fairly comprehensive.
Exactly.
And
was what we wanted to do.
And putting it in the Constitution would allow a constitutional tool to challenge a lot of the culture war stuff that's going on in the legislature currently.
Correct, which again, a lot of people think about equal rights in the shape of workplace discrimination and housing discrimination, public accommodation discrimination, and yes, though they're important, we also felt it important to articulate out that discriminatory legislation is discriminatory. It seems like a no-brainer, but we wanted to make sure that we were being explicit so that there's less wiggle room for interpretation to say, well, but maybe, and all that sort of thing.
The LGBTQ plus community is a big part of this.
Yes, it is. We are a trans-led organization, and we're not ashamed of that. That's part of why we built the language the way we did. We realized that we are a very small portion of Ohioans, so we need to be able to build coalitions.
So back to today's decision, because it's kind of the stumbling block. Well, let me back up one more. You were hoping to have this on Ohio's ballot in 2026, if I'm correct.
That was what we had been aiming for.
Yeah. So does today's decision make that less likely?
I don't know that it makes it any less likely. It changes what we need to do in order to get there. First and foremost, and I know this has been a question that has come up with a lot of folks, we do not have an answer right now as to what path we're going to go down. We have talked with our lawyers and we are getting data about what the costs and probabilities of different options would be, but we do have some paths forward to decide on. So some of those are easier, some of those are harder.
According to your Facebook page, you're really looking at 3 options.
Correct.
And they would be what?
So our top 3 options, or the most clear-cut options, are to sue or try and get this done as 2 separate amendments like the ballot board had asked, or change the language and start over with new language that might pass the single issue question more easily with this particular ballot board.
Is that possible?
I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to say for sure. I think anything is possible. This is 2025. I don't know that I'd be horribly surprised if the ground split open and creatures started climbing out of it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. But no, I mean, from what I have read and what I have heard, and I don't know if you were in the hearing when they made their decision or not. If you were,
yes,
okay. Well, then I'm going to ask you to share what that was like. But it sounds to me like they were, it was pretty partisan, and their minds were pretty much made up before they even got in there. What based on what you saw and heard, what do you think?
Oh, I think that is absolutely the case. As soon as Gavarone started the questioning with bringing in bathrooms, I kind of started preparing for, well, this isn't going to go the way that we wanted it to. But
she started it off with bathrooms.
Yes.
Wow.
Her first question was about whether it was appropriate to lump marriage equality in with forcing trans women into women's spaces, which, yes, that's where they belong. Nobody's trying to do anything odd there. It's just women using the women's restroom.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, she did not use those terms, but I'm not going to use the terms that she did.
Fair enough. But that kind of indicates where their heads are right off the bat.
Yeah.
So is there, based on what you witnessed being there, is their issue just the marriage amendment, or do they have issues with other things too?
So they actually sounded, especially Frank LaRose's line of questioning, they actually sounded more optimistic about same-sex marriage.
What do you mean?
LaRose actually made the point of, well, some people might be okay with amending our Constitution and getting rid of the ban on same-sex marriage. Those same people might not be okay with expanding non-discrimination protection to all of these different classes. When
I hear it said that way, I'm going to tell you, when I hear it said that way, it doesn't sound as bad as the rest of it.
Yeah.
You agree?
And it sounds more optimistic, like he's saying that we have moved the needle on marriage equality, and I think that is probably the case.
Yeah.
Because we have had 10 years of marriage equality, and nothing has happened. People have gotten married and built their families and lived their lives.
But yet the ballot board is not really supposed to be making those kind of political decisions. That's a strategic political decision, and that's really not their function.
No, it is not, and they had cases before them in 2010 and 2023 where the Ohio Supreme Court reiterated the fact that they are supposed to be simply ruling on single issue or not.
Right.
Now, with the current makeup of the Supreme Court in Ohio being 6-1, I can definitely see the calculus in wanting to have something come before the current Ohio Supreme Court that would set new precedent and shift the Overton window a little bit for how the ballot board does its job. And, the composition of the Supreme Court in Ohio, that's something that has impacted cases not just like today's, but like with school funding, where we've had Ohio's school funding process be found unconstitutional on more than one occasion, and yet it has not been challenged in courts for a while, in part, from my understanding, because of the fear that the Supreme Court would find it constitutional instead.
I'm going to say, with my background and my experience in schools and with suing the state over school funding, which I've been involved in heavily, I'm going to disagree with that. That actually is not what's happening. And in fact, we are suing the state currently over ed choice vouchers, which is a big piece of the school funding picture. So I'm not sure that I agree with that. And those DeRolf decisions were a very long time ago. Very different court. This court,
Yeah.
this court, though, I think your point is well taken, and you've articulated that this particular court is a very political court.
Yes, and I should have been more clear. I was specifically talking about the property tax portion of school funding.
Well, they haven't heard that yet. That's not been heard yet, but nonetheless. It is a very partisan political court. Much more than we've ever had in the state of Ohio, and probably much more than most states have. I can't think of any state that's up to our level in offhand. I mean, there probably is, but I don't know. But anyway, back to this. So you're looking at three options. Suing the state is one. Looking to recertify two separate amendments and submit signatures for both is a second. And the third is to certify a new version. And you point out here on your post that, any of them will cost a lot of money and time. How much?
Yes.
How much does that figure into the strategic calculus?
Well, I think, especially in today's climate, if an organization is not considering cost and feasibility as part of their campaign strategy, then they probably aren't getting as comprehensive a picture as they could be. So yes, it is a part of our calculus, and we are looking at that. That's part of why we don't have an answer right off the bat. We're waiting to get figures on what would be the cost for those different things.
When will you make a decision?
We have a leadership meeting tomorrow evening, and that is the big item on the agenda.
Okay. And you'll let us know?
We will have press releases out about our decision and what we're doing for our path forward, yes.
So all of these are different challenges, but the one thing that is certain is that there are going to ultimately have to be a lot of signatures collected. And I'm looking here. I think it's 413,487 valid signatures. That means you got to get a heck of a lot more than that from at least 44 of Ohio's 88 counties. That's a pretty tall order, and it can be very expensive.
Yeah. That is accurate, and we have seen the cost of ballot initiatives creep up, especially with Citizens Not Politicians last year, in part because of the extensive opposition that they faced, in part from the state of Ohio.
Well, the state of Ohio, the Republicans in the state of Ohio played pretty dirty on that.
Yes,
that was deliberate deception on their part.
Mm-hmm. And we get to redraw these maps again this coming fall, so we'll see what they get up to this fall.
So, are you thinking that they are looking to be deliberately deceptive on your amendments, or are you seeing that they're just being obstinate? Because that's two different things. One is they're just standing in the way, and the other is they're trying to put their thumb on the scale like they did last year. What do you see?
So I don't know that it's entirely an either or question here. There can be a mix of both. in my mind. Because first and foremost, our language and our amendment is a far simpler verbiage. It's considerably shorter than Citizens Not Politicians, which makes it harder to spin misinformation.
Right.
When you're talking about gerrymandering and redistricting and building maps, a lot of folks don't understand that because it is a complex process that has a lot of professionals involved in it, and it just gets messy to try and explain it to a lot of people. Equal rights is a little bit more clear-cut. Our language is shorter, more succinct. I think it's easier to explain. So for me, that makes it a little bit harder for them to throw misinformation out there. I'm sure there are going to be some organizations and some individuals in Ohio that will continue to do that, because we've already seen this overemphasis on the trans community.
Mm-hmm.
It ignores the fact that it also protects people based on their military status. It also protects people based on their disease status, their disability status. So saying it's just about this small group of individuals is a little bit disingenuous.
It is, but the opposition is going to say that.
Yeah, and that's part of why we are looking at when we were crafting our path to victory, how many signatures and votes we needed in all of the counties. We explicitly were looking at all 88 counties because we do want to have those big conversations with all Ohioans talking about what does it mean to have your rights protected? What does it mean under our current Constitution to have so little protections? Why is it important to bring these protections to the state level instead of just relying on federal protections? Because I think those big conversations are where we have a better opportunity to see each other as people and see each other as folks with a shared interest in Ohio. I've been working on a healthcare disparities research project with a student from University of Dayton, and the number of counties that already do not have any labor and delivery unit in their county is depressing. And with the Medicaid cuts, that's likely to get even worse. That's not something that impacts just one group of Ohioans or another. It is something that impacts especially rural folks, no matter their race, religion, whatever. So things like that are real consequences of policy that people might not be thinking about here in the moment when politicians are talking about bathrooms and sport, etc.
And I think there will be a lot of people that agree with that. But the opposition, the opposition will be wanting to talk about Riley Gaines and bathrooms. I mean, it's just that's the way it is. That's what you're facing here, and the LGBTQ piece will be the only piece that most people see, for good, bad, or indifferent. When it gets to the ballot.
I don't know that that's necessarily the case, that it's the only part that people will see, because we do hear a number of folks getting upset as they learn more about the state budget and the federal budget and the ways that those policies impact people. So I think people are understanding the lack of protections that we have and the lack of a state government, especially, that is interested in governance.
Yeah, I think that's
Mhm.
I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah,
And
it has been over 10 years since they drained the local government's fund, not restored those funds, and communities are hurting.
so let me get into a little bit of brass tacks here, and just as we're talking about this, what do you think it's going to cost, assuming that you keep these together, and the repeal of the marriage ban amendment stays in? What do you think it's going to cost to run the campaign to pass this? What's the budget?
So the budget is fairly extensive with lots of rows and numbers.
I understand that. I'm just trying to get a feel for what you all think this is going to cost, because my next question is, where's it going to come from?
So we think that we will likely be able to stay on the lower end of these ballot initiatives, in part because we have seen, especially since last week's certification, people getting more interested and wanting to help out. If we can limit the number of paid petition circulators, that really helps the calculus a lot.
Yeah.
Also, having those deep canvassing conversations and pre-bunking, that helps to mitigate the impact of misinformation that's spread. So that helps lower the cost. We're relying on both of those things. Because we are grassroots. We know, just as an example, simply printing the petitions, if they had been approved as a single issue, that would have been around $30,000.
Uh-huh.
So I know in Ohio we've seen ranges of anywhere from $4 to $50 million for an initiative like this. Our goal is to keep it on the lower end of that. As far as who's going to pay for it, well, we did just get another grant, which we're happy about. So that'll help with some of it. Grassroots fundraising is also something that we've been working on and continue working on.
How much and from whom? It was the grant. How much and from whom?
So that was $5,000 from the Trans Justice Foundation.
Okay.
Because they are committed to helping Ohio because of the impact that our legislators have had on this community. So yes, it's a marginalized group stepping up to try and help everybody in the state. That's what we do. Beyond those numbers, we've been talking with and working with other organizations, and we have yet to find anybody who has said, no, we don't want to see this pass. It has been a matter of how do we work together. So we're continuing with that coalition building so that we can share the load a little bit more easily.
Ohio is an expensive state to run a statewide campaign, in part because the media markets are expensive, and the way the media is set up in Ohio is expensive, much more expensive than a lot of states that have fewer population centers.
Yes, which is always interesting to me, but
well, I mean, having reported on a number of statewide campaigns and working a couple of statewide campaigns, the issue in Ohio is you have 5 different media regions, as opposed to states that maybe have one or two. So these types of campaigns get particularly expensive in Ohio. And, one of the reasons why, why we tend to lose them is that we don't adequately fund them. Even, I suspect that this will be an all hands on deck time, and, our community will respond to that much the way we did in 2004, and much the way the organized labor communities have responded to statewide initiatives subsequently. But it takes a lot more than that. It takes that, but it takes a lot more than that. And so what I'm fishing for is, when you've worked out your budget, and you've looked at what the media realities are, because it's going to take a lot of paid media, and you've looked at what it's going to take to support the field operation on the ground, which in Ohio isn't cheap either. That's why I'm asking, what do you think it's going to cost, and do you have the capacity to raise that kind of money? Because if you go into this with like a $5 million budget, you're going to get slaughtered at the polls. This is going to be an expensive one. And CCV is now the Center for Christian Virtue, the most wrongly named organization in history. But I mean, they have billionaire money, and they're not afraid to spend it. And
yes, and they were recently labeled by Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group, which I think is a long overdue designation.
But in the as a campaign rolls on, that's not going to matter, because they'll just they'll funnel the money through PACs and nonprofit organizations like they always do. I mean, we know how they operate. We've covered them. We know how they spend money, and we know how they have shadow organizations and ways to put money in different places. They've got it covered. You're going to have to counter that.
Yes, and like I said, this is why we're relying on that deep canvassing across the whole state. Because what the research shows is that deep canvassing tends to do better at changing hearts and minds and getting people on our side than just media markets.
So is there go ahead.
As a good example, last year's November election had an investment of over $300 million across the U.S. in anti-trans attack ads.
Yes, it did.
The polling, the surveys after, a few weeks after the election had happened, most people did not remember those ads. Most people did not remember the messaging of those ads. Those ads didn't stick around in people's minds.
So am I
having a conversation is a different thing.
So am I hearing a strategy of winning even if it loses at the polls?
I don't know that I'd put it that way. Our strategy is to connect with people and help people understand the importance of protecting our rights for all Ohioans and highlighting the fact that we don't have these protections at the state level currently.
Okay.
The way Ohio has to rely on federal level protections means that when someone faces discrimination, they have to go through those federal routes. Those are expensive and time consuming and not very accessible to most Ohioans, especially people who are lower income and may not be able to save, let alone put out the big dollars for an extended period of time of employing a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Having it at the state level, if someone thinks that they are being discriminated against because of their religion, great, bring it to the Ohio Supreme Court. Let's hear those cases.
Well, and the other thing about the state of Ohio is that there's such a hodgepodge. And for example, in the major cities, there's ordinances, whereas in the the hinterlands there's not.
We've seen home rule preemption as a tool that the legislature has used on other issues besides non-discrimination.
Yeah.
So we know that there are ways for them to get around those protections. Those non-discrimination ordinances are not as safe as I'd like to see them.
Yeah.
Because of that tactic of home rule preemption.
All right, so I guess at this point, we need to wait on your announcement as to strategy is the next step as to which of the three options are going to be picked. Now, do you have to start the process over again once you do that, or is what you've already done a step forward? Like if you substantially change the amendment to make it two different amendments, for example, which would require a second set of petitions.
I would have to check with our lawyers to be 100% sure. And I know I have that in my notes from this morning somewhere. I don't believe that option sets us back to step one. But again, I'm a biologist, not a lawyer. So I would have to go back to my notes from our lawyer. And that's part of why we're taking our time with making this decision. Do want to...
Who's representing you? Who's the lawyer? Who's representing you?
So we're working with McTeague and Colombo.
Okay.
Law firm here in Columbus, who has been active on a number of other ballot initiatives.
Well, they actually represented the opponents to the marriage ban amendment too. Don McTeague has a long history with our community.
Yeah, they have a long history with ballot initiatives in general, which is part of why we went with them.
Yeah. So, this will be a really transformative thing if it goes forward. Oh, I know what I was going to ask. So I kind of wanted to go a little bit farther down the road because you were at the hearing when the ballot board met. What what else can you tell us about it? I mean, was there anything that really stood out as, I don't know, either brilliant or stupid or both? Anything interesting that's noteworthy that was said?
I think it was starting off the questioning with bathrooms was a tactic. It was definitely an interesting moment, but that's where they want to go. That's fine. I was a little bit surprised at the one-sidedness. Questions were coming from the Republican side of the ballot board, and I don't believe any questions from Demora and Upchurch. So that felt a little bit skewed, and it made a little bit more sense afterwards when we were talking with folks in the hearing room, and one of the staff members was mentioning that this is the first time in 14 years she's seen the Republicans on the controlling side of the ballot board not give a heads up that they were considering splitting something. So that was a upsetting deviation from norms that sounds in line with what we've seen in the legislature itself. Short notice on when we're going to be having votes, testimony, things like that. So I can understand that as a strategic decision, if you control both houses with a supermajority and the executive and judicial branch, there's not a lot of room for checks and balances, and that can lead to a feeling of we don't need to uphold these norms that have traditionally been in place.
Yeah. And you got that feeling today as well.
Yeah. It's not a comfortable feeling for me because I'm proud of the fact that I'm an Ohio boy. I have been here my entire life. This is where my heart is. And seeing that shift isn't something I like.
Yeah. Well, and you're part of a political family in Ohio as well.
Yes. I mean, Ralph Regula was a Republican and helped to bring the Cuyahoga Valley National Park to our state.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time imagining something like that happening today.
I think Ralph would agree with that.
Yeah.
Because that was largely a bipartisan effort between him and John Seiberling, and I think both of them, were they still alive, would agree with that observation. But nonetheless, it is what it is. So, as we wrap up here, tell our listeners where they can find the Ohio Equal Rights Campaign and what they can do.
Sure. So our website is easy to remember, ohioequalrights.org. We are also on Facebook and Instagram. That has the language. It has links for contacting us if you have questions. It also has ways that you can donate or sign up to volunteer, or just sign up to get updates if you want to keep informed about what's going on.
You want to give that one more time?
Sure. It's ohioequalrights.org. We do also have information about events. We had our HIV criminalization webinar a couple weeks ago with with the Ohio chapter of National Lawyers Guild. which has some really good information. And we're working on some additional webinars and events coming up. We had planned them to be celebratory, but that's okay. So you'll see news as we clarify details and get things finalized. And yeah, feel free to reach out with any questions.
All right. Well, listeners, this is Gay Waves, and you've been listening to our time with Lis Regula, who was representing the Ohio Equal Rights Campaign, trying to put an equal rights amendment in the state of Ohio's Constitution. And they've been making a lot of news, but check them out. Lis, thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Always a pleasure talking to you.